Okay, let's talk about indictments in Georgia. Um, Today's Monday, July 10th, and I think the indictments in Georgia are going to come out anytime between July 31st and August 15th, somewhere in that range. District Attorney in Fulton County, Georgia, Fonnie Willis, has certainly indicated that her plans are consistent with that time frame. And so that's kind of what I think we're looking at here. So what are some of the potential charges that Trump and his cohorts are facing? And we're going to talk about who some of these potential defendants are in a couple of minutes as well. Um, Multiple felonies, solicitation to commit election fraud. Uh, and don't forget what gave rise to this case. I think it was on January 2nd of 2021. Trump had his phone call with uh, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. I just need you to find me 11,780 votes. That's one more than we need. Blah, blah, blah. Recalculate, put it out, flip the election on my behalf. Trump was telling the Secretary of State for the state of Georgia explicitly to flip the results of the election in the state of Georgia. And Trump was on the phone with the guy for an hour. That phone call was recorded, and very shortly thereafter it was released. Now let's bear in mind, this is January 2nd, 2021. What has happened? It's been 2 months since Election Day, okay? Election Day of November 3rd-ish of 2020. 2 months has gone by. All of Rudy Giuliani's lawsuits have failed. So now Trump and everybody's getting desperate. Remember, there was the White House meeting with the crazy crew that took place on December 18th or 19th, and that ended, and a couple hours later at 2 o'clock in the morning was when Trump tweeted out, big protest in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, be there, will be wild. And so this phone call takes place on January 2nd, 2021, 4 days before that. Trump had already been badgering in a similar fashion the governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, who wasn't having it. Well, he just wasn't having it at all. Neither was Brad Raffensperger, thank God. But who was on that call? Trump, Brad Raffensperger, Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, who during that period of time, thank God, had a penchant for going on Ari Melber's show and describing in great detail that they were engaging in a coup, which I thought was fantastic. I mean, and he just did it again and again and again. Him and Boris Epstein just kept going on Ari Melber's show and say, yeah, we're doing a coup. A couple folks from the Justice Department, a guy named John Lott, law professor John Eastman, who's responsible for the fake electors, and attorneys Rudy Giuliani, Cleta Mitchell, Alex Kaufman, and Kurt Hilbert. All of these people were on this phone call with Brad Raffensperger saying, find me votes, find me votes, find me votes. So solicitation to commit election fraud is one count. And don't forget that Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, had also called Brad Raffensperger in Georgia asking him to throw out mail-in ballots. Because why not, I guess. So solicitation to commit election fraud, trying to get someone to do that on your behalf, conspiracy to commit election fraud. I mean, every single person who was on that phone call is going to be part of a conspiracy, as well as all of the fake electors for the state of Georgia. We'll talk about them in a second. Intentional interference with performance of election duties. Again, that's what that phone call was. And interference with primaries and elections and filing false documents. I mean, these charges are all pretty similar, but making false statements A lot of this involves, like making false statements kind of in your official capacity kind of thing. Georgia law has a very broad prohibition against making false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements or representations in any matter within the jurisdiction of any department or agency of state government. Like, I don't know, the Secretary of State's office and the administration of elections. Racketeering. Now, this is going to be the big one. And this, I have a slightly unpopular opinion on this. Racketeering is what, amazingly, Rudy Giuliani used to prosecute the 5 mafia families in New York City throughout the 80s and into the 90s. And these laws were designed by that. It's the statute is RICO. It's an acronym, it's all caps. Stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Basically means mob families, mafia families. And it can be a complicated area of the law. My fear is that the 6 or 7 statutory areas and felonies and violations that I just listed are pretty easy to prosecute, especially when you have a tape recording with a bunch of witnesses on it. Racketeering, RICO is a whole other ballgame, man. It is just a whole other ballgame. And the best prosecutors, when they're prosecuting their cases, they try to keep their prosecutions simple. They try to keep the charges simple and easy to understand, easy for a jury to comprehend, and they just can't keep their prosecutions clean. So there are enough other felonies that part of me kind of hopes that Fani Willis kind of forgoes the RICO charges, because I think it's got the potential to just really kind of muck things up a bit. That's just me. So, who are the potential defendants coming out of Georgia? Remember when there was the woman who had been a member of the first grand jury a few months ago, was making the rounds on cable news and talking about some of the things that they had done in the grand jury, which she wasn't prohibited from doing. I don't know that it was necessarily the smartest thing to do, but she did it. And we all got some insight from that. She very strongly indicated that there's going to be upwards of a dozen people charged, and that most of the people charged are going to be facing multiple felony counts, mainly from the list of charges that I just read. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6 different charges. And depending on the acts that people engaged in, you can be indicted more than one time for each act, meaning that if you solicited more than one person to commit election fraud, you can face more than just one count of that violation. So who's looking at getting charged? Trump, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani. I would imagine Sidney Powell, the Kraken attorney, everybody who was on that phone call, Peter Navarro, John Eastman, Cleta Mitchell, an attorney. There's another attorney out of Georgia named Lynn Wood who has been all up in this election fraud stuff. I don't know that he did anything specific as it relates to this fact pattern, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him get charged either. Lindsey Graham, he called Raffensperger as well. Michael Flynn is neck deep in this stuff, and we'll talk about this more in a minute. There's an attorney who was working out of the White House, I believe. His name was Kenneth Cheesebro, who, along with John Eastman, was really spearheading this fake elector stuff. You remember an attorney, she's blonde, she was the one who was sitting next to Rudy Giuliani during one of their fake hearings, and he farted on her. Jenna Ellis, who billed herself throughout that entire time period as a constitutional law expert, and her only qualification for saying that was that she'd actually gone to law school and passed the bar exam, which ain't nothing, but that doesn't make you a constitutional law expert. It just doesn't. I'm sorry. The attorney Cleta Mitchell that I mentioned, Peter Navarro that I mentioned, They're all looking at getting charged. And that brings us to the fake electors for the state of Georgia. There are 16. What are the fake electors? Well, I think I wrote that down here. Let me say. So across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, across like 7 or 8 states, all swing states, there were 84 people who signed bogus documents claiming that Donald Trump had won the 2020 election, and that they created these documents, which I don't know, people also refer to as forgeries, because they submitted them to Congress, they submitted them to the National Archives, they submitted them to their own state houses, knowing that they were fraudulent, saying that they were the duly elected electors for their given state because Donald Trump had actually won their state instead of Joe Biden, because the election had been stolen, because Rudy Giuliani said so, because he had a lot of theories, but not really any evidence. So in the state of Georgia, the 16 fake electors met at the state capitol on December 14th, 2020, and signed a certificate declaring falsely that Trump had won the presidential election and declared themselves the state's duly elected and qualified electors. Meaning they were saying to Congress on January 6th, don't count the Democratic electors' votes, count our votes instead, because Trump really won the state of Georgia. They had no evidence of that. They knew what they were putting forth was false and fraudulent, and they sent that to Congress. That is going to be problematic for them. Now, because that's fraud, that's making false statements, it's a conspiracy, it's all of that stuff. And all of this fake elector stuff was being directed out of the Oval Office by John Eastman, and Kenneth Chesebro and Mark Meadows. And I think several other Republican members of the House and the Senate had a hand in that stuff as well. So there were 16 fake electors for the state of Georgia. Fonnie Willis, God love her, granted immunity to 8 of the 16. And boy, I wouldn't want to be on the wrong half of that deal. So 8 of them have immunity, which means when you are offered immunity and you accept immunity, you no longer have your Fifth Amendment privilege. You can't refuse to answer questions on your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, because you're not going to be incriminated because you have immunity. So once those folks accepted that grant of immunity, they have to answer every question that is put to them, and they have to do it. They have to do it accurately, completely, and honestly, or they could lose their immunity. But this wasn't just, like 16 MAGA folks that got picked out of a Trump rally. Okay, these are all like Georgia state Republican officials, either at the state or county or local level. Joseph Brannon is the treasurer for the Georgia Republican Party. James Carroll is assistant secretary for the Georgia State Republican Party. Vicki Townsend, assistant treasurer for the Georgia State Republican Party. She's also on the board of governors for the Georgia Republican Foundation. Carolyn Hall Fisher is the vice chairman for the Georgia Republican Party. And several of them are elected officials. State Senator Burt Jones is currently serving. He's running for lieutenant governor, and he's endorsed by Trump. Gloria K. Godwin, local Republican leader, co-founder of the grassroots group Georgia Conservatives in Action. She's served on city councils, all kinds of things. David Hanna is CEO and founder of Atlanticus Holdings Corporation, an Atlanta-based financial holding company. Mark Hennessy is CEO of several car dealerships around the Atlanta area. And on and on and on. One guy is a House District Chair for the Cobb County Republican Party. One's a school teacher. One's a mega donor and part of the Georgia Republican Foundation. One's a lawyer, chairman of the state GOP and a Georgia state senator. for almost 20 years is another guy. And so it's like these people aren't just MAGA bumpkins, okay? They are people who have been involved in and have achieved certain levels within the Republican Party in the state of Georgia going back over the last 20, 30 years. And half of them got immunity and half of them didn't. So, assuming that the half that didn't are going to get prosecuted, you're easily going to hit 12 to 15 people um, with these indictments coming out of Georgia. And again, it's like I think we're about 3 weeks away from that. And I think Jack Smith is going to put out his election interference indictments out of Washington D.C. before Fonnie Willis does. I don't see a federal prosecutor letting a state prosecutor go first and steal his thunder. That's just me. So, what are the other states where these fake elector schemes took place? They took place in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. All of those are swing states in the 2020 election, and all of them were won by Joe Biden. And you remember Pennsylvania with their representative, who member of Congress, guy named Scott Perry, who I think he's primarily responsible for getting Trump hooked up with John Eastman and some of these other characters. He's had his phone seized by the FBI. John Eastman's had his phone seized by the FBI. Many of these people were also called before the grand jury in Georgia to testify. But people like John Eastman pled fifth. He asserted his Fifth Amendment privilege, so we know he didn't get immunity. Mike Flynn asserted his Fifth Amendment privilege. Lindsey Graham had to testify. We don't know what he had to say. Burt Jones, we talked about. He's one of the people who's been charged. We don't know whether he got immunity or not. Newt Gingrich had to testify. Brian Kemp, the governor, had to testify. Raffensperger testified. Mark Meadows, chief of staff, had to testify. Fonnie Willis has invited Donald Trump to testify, but has not yet subpoenaed him to testify in front of the grand jury. So I think that ship has pretty well sailed. So, but we're 3 or 4 weeks out from another round of indictments. And this next rounds of indictments are going to be much bigger than anything we saw out of Manhattan and much bigger than anything we saw out of southern Florida, because these cases are going to be conspiracy cases and they're going to involve a lot of people. It's 10 to 15 people is my guess. And each of those 10 to 15 people are going to be facing multiple felony counts. And August is going to be a crazy month. So stay tuned. When the indictments come out, I'll do what I did with the one that came out of Florida. I will read it. I'll make a video reading the whole thing and, adding in my thoughts and my commentary, and then we'll go from there. And then it's just going to be a matter of how many of these felony criminal trials are actually going to happen before either the primaries or before election day. And the question being is like, is the Republican Party going to nominate Donald Trump as their presidential candidate if he is a convicted felon by January of next year? And if he's not convicted felon by then, are they going to vote for him for president if he is the nominee and between the nomination process and election day, he's convicted of a dozen or more felony counts in more than one courtroom? We are in the upside down, and I don't even know what's happening anymore. But stay tuned, and we will all try to get through it together. Have a great night.